The wind carried the smell of burnt metal and ashes across the ruined land. A human soldier named Kane walked slowly, his boots crunching on broken glass and scattered stone. The war had ended weeks ago, but this place still looked like hell. Rusted weapons lay half buried in the dirt, and the silence was broken only by the sound of crows circling above. Kane carried a small pack with only a few pieces of food left. Every step reminded him how alone he was. He stopped when he heard a faint sound. It was not the cry of a bird, nor the groan of broken metal. It was soft, weak, almost like a whimper. Kane turned his head and saw movement near the wreckage of a transport pod. The sound came again, and this time it was clearer. A cub, small, thin, and trembling, crawled out from behind the broken pod wall. Its fur was a mix of silver and black stripes, but dirty and matted with ash. Its eyes glowed faintly, large and full of fear. Kane froze. The creature was alien, and he had seen its kind before, though always as adults, fierce and deadly. They were hunters, quick and merciless, with claws that could rip through armor. But this one was nothing like that. The cub was starving. Its ribs showed through its fur, and its legs shook as if standing was too heavy a task. It looked at Kane, not with hatred, but with silent desperation. Kane's first thought was to walk away. He could not afford to share food. He barely had enough to survive himself. Yet the cub made a sound again, a tiny cry that pierced the silence. Kane sighed, dropped his pack to the ground, and opened it slowly. He took out a ration bar, dry, rough, and tasteless even for humans. He broke it in half, then tossed one piece across the ground toward the cub. The cub sniffed the air. Its nose twitched, and then it stumbled forward. Every step looked painful, but the hunger pulled it closer. It reached the food, sniffed again, and finally began to eat. Kane watched, his hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, ready in case the cub tried anything strange. But there was no trick. It devoured the food so quickly that crumbs scattered across the dirt. When it was finished, it looked up at him, licking its mouth, its glowing eyes locked on his face. Kane felt something inside him shift. He had seen soldiers die. He had seen whole villages burn, but he had not seen something this helpless in years. Against his better judgment, he pulled out the second half of the ration bar and tossed it over. The cub ate slower this time, as if savoring the taste. Then it did something unexpected. It walked a little closer to him. The soldier stiffened. His finger hovered near the trigger, but the cub only sat down a few feet away. It tilted its head, ears flicking, as if studying him. For a moment, the strange silence returned. Kane could hear only the faint hiss of wind moving through the ruins. Then came another sound, low, deep, a growl. Kane's muscles tightened. His eyes swept the wreckage, searching the shadows. The cub's ears twitched, and it turned its head back toward the forest. The growl came again, this time closer, echoing through the ruins like a warning. Kane slowly reached for his rifle. The cub did not move. It only stared at the forest edge, tail stiff, as if it knew the sound very well. Kane's heart beat faster. He realized then, where there was a cub, there was always a mother. And if this was the species he thought it was, then the mother was not far. She would be larger, stronger, and far deadlier than the cub. She might already be watching him. The soldier stood, scanning every shadow. The setting sun painted the ruins in long strips of orange and black. His instincts screamed at him to run, but he stayed still, breathing slow, his rifle steady in his hands. The cub gave a soft noise, almost a chirp, as if answering the growl. Kane's eyes locked on the tree line. Between the broken branches, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, brighter, sharper than the cub's. They blinked once and then vanished into the dark. Kane's stomach tightened. She was there. The cub looked back at Kane, then back at the forest. Its body trembled, but not from hunger this time. It was waiting. Kane could feel it. The cub was not afraid. It knew exactly who had made that sound. And it was only a matter of time before she stepped into the open. The soldier swallowed hard. He had fed a starving cub. But now the real question burned in his mind. What would the mother do when she found her child sitting so close to a human? The growl came again, louder this time. Kane tightened his grip on the rifle and forced his breath steady. Somewhere in the ruins, something heavy moved through the shadows. The cub's glowing eyes never left the dark tree line. Kane knew then that his act of kindness had not gone unnoticed, and soon the true test would begin. The night settled heavy around the ruins, and the soldier sat by his dim fire, its weak flames barely pushing back the shadows. Every crack of wood, every whisper of wind made his nerves sharper. The cub had vanished into the darkness hours ago, leaving him with only silence and the uneasy memory of those glowing eyes in the trees. He kept his rifle across his knees, but part of him wondered if a bullet would even matter when she came. A sudden rustle broke the stillness. Kane's breath caught. From between two shattered walls, the cub appeared again. Its fur glowed faintly in the firelight, its steps steadier than before. It trotted forward, carrying something in its small jaws, a broken piece of bone with scraps of meat still clinging to it. It dropped the bone in front of him, as if offering a gift. Kane frowned, staring at the strange gesture. Before he could react, the air grew colder. A new presence pressed against his skin, heavy, primal. Kane looked up slowly, his eyes moving past the cub toward the shadows beyond. That was when she stepped out. Her body was massive, towering over him even in the darkness. Muscles rippled beneath her striped fur, silver and black with streaks that shimmered in the firelight. Her eyes burned like molten amber, unblinking, fixed on him with a predator's calm. She moved forward silently, each step careful, balanced, like a queen surveying her land. Kane's hand tightened around his rifle, but the cub gave a soft cry and darted between them, standing proudly in front of its mother. It looked back at her, then at him, as if showing what it had found. Her gaze followed, and for a long, breathless moment, she studied the human who had dared to feed her child. He expected a roar, a leap, claws tearing through his throat. Instead, she lowered her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his face. She circled the fire, slow, deliberate, her massive tail swaying like a weapon waiting to strike. Kane turned with her, his heartbeat loud in his ears, his rifle trembling though he tried to steady it. When she came closer, her scent hit him, wild, earthy, mixed with something sharp and sweet. It was not the stench of an animal, but something alive, intelligent, dangerous in more ways than one. She stopped within a few feet, her body low, her golden eyes gleaming with a strange mix of hunger and curiosity. The cub rubbed against her leg, then sat down between them. Kane realized with a chill that the cub was not afraid at all. It trusted both of them, as if the line between predator and protector had already blurred. She moved closer still until the heat of her breath brushed his skin. Her lips pulled back, not in a snarl but in something else, an expression he could not name, almost like a challenge. Her eyes locked onto his rifle and then back to his face, daring him to choose. Kane's throat went dry. His training told him to fire, to survive, but something deeper told him to wait. Slowly, he loosened his grip on the weapon. The tigress tilted her head, her sharp fangs gleaming as firelight flickered over them. Then, in a motion so sudden he almost fired anyway, she pushed the bone her cub had brought closer to him with her paw. Kane stared, his pulse pounding. She had accepted his gift to her cub, and now she was giving something back, or testing him. Either way, the line between life and death had never felt thinner. The tigress straightened, her gaze shifting upward to the broken sky, then back to him. Her tail brushed the dirt, her body tense but still. She was not attacking, not leaving. She was staying, and Kane, staring into her burning eyes, knew the night had only just begun. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, but Kane did not dare close his eyes. The tigress remained near, her body stretched across the ground like a shadow carved from silver and black. The cub slept soundly between them, its small chest rising and falling, unaware of the storm of tension pressing in the night air. Kane sat with his back against a broken wall, his rifle resting across his lap, though he knew it would be useless if she decided to end him. Hours passed in silence until she moved, her head lifted, ears twitching toward the darkness. Kane followed her gaze. From the tree line came a faint movement, shapes slipping between the broken ruins. Raiders. Their footsteps were quiet, but not enough to escape her senses. Kane's grip tightened on his weapon, his pulse hammering. One of the raiders stepped into view, face hidden behind a cracked mask, carrying a jagged blade. Another followed, holding a scavenged rifle. They had come for scraps, maybe prisoners, maybe worse. Kane stood slowly, keeping the cub behind him. The tigress rose too, a low growl rumbling from deep in her chest, sharp and chilling. The raiders froze when they saw her. Even in the half-light, her towering figure looked monstrous, her amber eyes glowing like fire. Yet instead of fleeing, they spread out, weapons raised. Desperate men always made dangerous choices. Kane lifted his rifle, finger brushing the trigger. The tigress glanced at him, her eyes narrowing, testing him. For one breath, it felt like she was deciding whether to fight beside him or leave him to die. Then she snarled, leaping forward with explosive force. Her claws tore through the first raider before he could even scream. Blood sprayed across the stones. Kane fired at the second, his shot cracking through the night. The man dropped, his weapon clattering against the ground. The cub woke with a frightened cry, but when it saw its mother standing over the fallen raiders, it crawled closer, eyes wide with pride rather than fear. Kane lowered his rifle slowly, his arms shaking from the rush of adrenaline. The tigress turned toward him, her face inches from his own. Her breath came fast, her body still coiled with energy, but her eyes were sharp, focused on him. She growled again, but this time it was not directed at him. It was low, almost questioning. Kane realized she was testing him, measuring if he could stand beside her in the fight, if he was strong enough to remain near her cub. He did not back down. He met her gaze, steady and unblinking, his chest rising with controlled breaths. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she did something unexpected. She dropped the raider's blade at his feet, her golden eyes locked on him. It was not a threat, but a gesture, an offering, a test of trust. Kane bent slowly, picking it up, the metal still warm from blood. The tigress leaned closer, her whiskers brushing his cheek. He could feel the dangerous weight of her presence, the heat of her body, the sharp edge of her power. Yet beneath it all was something else, a strange recognition, as if she had marked him in her own way. The cub pressed itself against both of them, purring softly, as though it already believed a bond had been formed. Kane realized then that survival had changed into something more. He had not just earned the cub's trust, he was standing at the edge of the tigress's judgment. And with each passing heartbeat, she seemed less like a monster in the dark and more like something far more dangerous, an ally who might claim him in ways he had not imagined. The ruins were quiet again, but Kane could not shake the feeling that silence itself had become part of her game. The tigress lay stretched out near the fire, her body sleek and powerful, her eyes half closed but never fully resting. Every so often she glanced at him, her gaze sharp enough to slice through his armor of caution. The cub slept curled beside her, safe, warm, and unaware of the strange tension between human and beast. Kane tried to keep busy. He cleaned his rifle, checked the little food he had left, but her eyes followed his every move. It was not the watch of a predator waiting for weakness. It was something else, a study, a judgment. She was measuring him, not for prey, but for worth. When the wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke and blood from the bodies of the raiders, she rose. Kane watched her circle him, slow steps deliberate, her massive paws brushing the dirt with silent grace. She was close enough that he could feel the heat of her breath, see the way her fangs glimmered in the firelight. He stood his ground. His instincts screamed to back away, but he forced himself still. If he showed fear now, he knew it would be over. She leaned forward, her face inches from his, her amber eyes burning with something beyond hunger. He felt the tip of her nose brush his neck, and the hair on his arms stood on end. Then she pushed him, not with claws, but with her shoulder. The force made him stumble back against the wall. She growled low, not threatening, but commanding. Kane understood. She was demanding proof of his strength, daring him to resist. His hand closed on the blade she had dropped earlier. For one tense moment, he thought she wanted him to fight her. But when he lifted it, she stepped closer, pressing her chest against the weapon, eyes locked on his. The message was clear. She was not afraid of his steel. She wanted to see if he would use it, or if he would stand with her instead. Kane slowly lowered the blade, never breaking her gaze. She let out a sound that was almost like a laugh, a rumble deep in her throat, rich with something wild and dangerous. Her tail swept across the ground, and her body curved around him, close enough that his skin burned under the weight of her presence. The cub stirred, opening its glowing eyes. It watched them both, tilting its head, as if sensing a change it could not yet name. The tigress nuzzled her cub once, then turned her eyes back to Kane, sharp and burning, a silent challenge hanging heavy in the air. He realized then that feeding the cub had been only the first step. Surviving the raiders had been another. But this was different. She was not just testing his courage anymore. She was drawing him into a bargain older than words, one written in the fire of her gaze and the brush of her body against his. Kane stood still, his breath heavy, his heart racing. She was no longer asking if he could survive her world. She was asking if he could belong to it. Dawn came with a sharp chill, the ruins bathed in pale light and long shadows. Kane had not slept, though the cub snored softly at his side. The tigress remained awake too, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she could sense threats before they appeared. She looked less like a beast and more like a sentinel, carved from muscle and instinct. When the sound of engines cracked the morning air, Kane's chest tightened. Across the ridge, a convoy of scavenger trucks rolled into view. Raiders again, but this time in greater numbers, armed with rifles and jagged armor. They were hunting, not just for scraps, but for anything alive. Kane checked his weapon. Too many. Ammunition too little. Alone, he would die. The tigress rose with a low growl, her body tense and ready. The cub hid behind Kane's legs, its glowing eyes wide with fear. For a strange second, the soldier and the beast looked at each other, and Kane understood. They would fight together. The raiders swarmed into the ruins, their shouts filling the air. Kane fired first, the crack of his rifle echoing like thunder. A man dropped, another ducked behind cover. Bullets sparked against stone. The tigress leapt forward with a roar so fierce the ground seemed to shake. She crashed into the enemy like a storm, claws shredding through steel and flesh alike. Blood sprayed across the rubble. Kane moved with her, firing between her strikes, covering her blind spots. When one raider tried to aim at her flank, Kane's shot split the man's chest. When another crept behind Kane, the tigress's tail lashed out, knocking him into the dirt before her fangs ended him. They fought as if they had done it for years, a rhythm born not from trust but from necessity that slowly began to feel like more. The cub darted forward, small but fierce, biting and clawing at a raider's leg until Kane pulled it back to safety. He could feel its heartbeat pounding against his chest, wild with terror but also pride. The tigress roared again, her voice shaking the ruins, her body painted with the red of fallen men. When the last raider tried to flee, Kane caught him in his sights, but before he pulled the trigger, the tigress pounced, crushing the man into the dirt with a sickening crunch. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of fire and the cub's sharp breathing. Kane lowered his rifle slowly, his arms trembled, his ears rang, but he was alive. The tigress turned to him, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Her eyes burned hotter than the dawn, not with rage, but with something deeper. She had fought beside him, and he had not faltered. She stepped closer, her body brushing against his as she passed. Her tail slid across his legs like a whisper, deliberate, almost teasing. Kane froze, caught between fear and something he could not name. The cub looked between them, its small face curious, as though it already knew what its mother's eyes were saying. The battle was over, but Kane felt it in his bones. The war between them had just begun. The fire crackled low that night, its glow casting long shadows on the broken walls. Kane sat close, his body aching from the fight, the smell of blood and smoke still clinging to him. The cub slept soundly against his boot, small and trusting. But the tigress did not sleep. She moved with slow grace around the fire, circling him as if deciding on a final judgment. Her golden eyes caught the flames, reflecting them back at him like two burning suns. Kane felt her presence pressing down on him, heavy and alive. She lowered herself to the ground, her muscles rippling under striped fur, her movements too fluid to be mistaken for anything less than deliberate. When she leaned closer, he caught her scent again, wild earth and sharp sweetness, mixed now with the heat of battle. It was not the scent of an enemy. It was something else, something dangerously close to desire. She spoke without words, a slow brush of her tail across his arm, the way her breath lingered at his neck, the rumble in her throat that vibrated more like a purr than a growl. Kane held still, his pulse hammering, his mind torn between instinct to fight and an urge he did not understand. The tigress tilted her head, her eyes narrowing, and then she pressed closer, her massive body curved against his. It was not aggression. It was an offer, bold and primal. Kane's hand twitched toward his blade, then froze when he realized she had left her throat exposed near him, her amber eyes daring him to act. Not prey, not predator. A challenge. The cub stirred and gave a soft chirp, but quickly curled back into sleep. The night grew quieter, every sound sharper. The tigress shifted, her face inches from his, her hot breath brushing his lips. She was no longer testing if he could survive her. She was testing if he could claim her. Kane's chest tightened. The war in his mind roared louder than any battlefield he had walked. To refuse her might mark him as weak. To accept her meant crossing a line that could never be undone. Her gaze never wavered, her body warm and unyielding against his. The fire cracked, sparks leaping into the night sky, and Kane finally understood she had chosen him, but only if he chose her in return. The tigress pressed closer, her rumbling purr wrapping around him like a cage. Kane clenched his fists, torn between fear, survival, and something that felt frighteningly like longing. The ruins around them faded to silence. It was only her eyes, her breath, her body waiting. She had fought beside him, spared him, tested him. Now, the final test hung in the air, thick and heavy. Would he remain a stranger, or become hers by fire and choice? The night had barely faded when the ambush came. Kane woke to the cub's frightened cry and the hiss of plasma fire tearing through the ruins. Raiders again, but this time they came with fury, desperate to finish what their brothers had failed to do. Smoke filled the air, and the ground shook under the thunder of their weapons. Kane grabbed his rifle and pulled the cub against him, shielding it as debris rained down. The tigress roared, a sound that split the dawn, her body flashing through the smoke as she tore into the enemy. But there were too many, their numbers spilling across the ruins like a flood. Kane fired until his weapon clicked empty, then swung the stolen blade with raw force, fighting beside her as the cub cried behind him. A blast struck close, stone shrapnel ripping across Kane's arm. He staggered, but did not fall. Through the haze, he saw one of the raiders break past the tigress, rushing for the cub. Without thinking, Kane threw himself forward, his body shielding the small creature. The raider's blade cut into his side, hot pain tearing through him, but Kane drove his own weapon up, ending the man with a desperate thrust. Blood ran down his armor, his strength fading, but he did not let go of the cub. He whispered to it, steady, as if his voice alone could promise safety. The tigress saw. She broke from her battle, crashing into the enemy with savage rage, her claws and fangs ripping them apart until silence fell again. When it was over, the ruins were painted red. Kane fell to his knees, his vision dim, but the cub clung to him, its small hands pressing against his chest as if begging him not to die. The tigress approached, her massive frame trembling with the weight of battle. She lowered her head to him, her golden eyes burning not with hunger or suspicion, but with something rawer, acceptance. She pressed her forehead to his, her breath warm and steady, as if sealing something ancient. The cub nestled between them, its soft purr vibrating through their wounds and silence. Kane felt it then. The bond was no longer in question. He had proven himself not by killing, not by strength alone, but by protecting what mattered most to her. The tigress curled around them both, her body a shield, her tail wrapping over the cub and brushing against him. She no longer saw a stranger. She no longer saw prey. She saw mate, protector, part of her pack. Kane leaned back against her warmth, his body weak but his spirit steady. The cub drifted to sleep between them, safe at last. As the smoke cleared and the sun rose, Kane understood the truth. He had fed a starving cub, and in doing so had fed something greater. Trust, family, a bond that crossed worlds. And as the tigress's eyes closed beside him, fierce and gentle all at once, Kane realized he would never walk alone again.